the Department of Public Enterprises. Let's remember, the Department of Public Enterprises was originally set up in the last years of the National Party, the last years of apartheid. And the idea behind it was that it was going to be a department of privatization. It was led by Darby de Villiers, who was a Springbok scrum-off, but then also later a minister. Okay. And the mission of that was for a national party realizing that there was a new political reality looming, is to try to dispense with as much of state capacity, developmental capacity, by privatizing. Now, if you look at that list, comrades, central state planning capacity, we half-fund that. But what we got was the National Planning Commission, which is not a central state planning capacity. It's better than not having any planning capacity, but it was more or less an NGO in our view, okay, which provided some useful insights through the National Development Plan, but other things which in our view as the party, and we've continued to argue this, has been. So we've not yet won that, but that remains an important call, and it's also come through the National Policy Conference of the ANC. How do we deepen the planning capacity of the state? Number two, single rural department, a new rural development department, we've won that. Whether that's helped to drive effective land reform is a big question, but that was the answer we were trying to achieve. Minerals and energy have been separated. Again, we're not sure. Can we say that we are happy with what is happening on minerals and on energy? I think there are big challenges there, but at least we got that. Higher education, yes, certainly. And the question of SOEs and the Department of Public Enterprises, that remains a hot and important debate, not just from our side, but inside of the ANC and government itself. And the question we need to ask is all of this bad stuff that's happening in boards of key SOEs, does it have to do with the fact that there's a disjuncture between the line departments, line Department of Transport or Energy and so forth, and the fact that then there's a separate public enterprises department? I'm not sure if that's the answer, but at least those are the issues that we were posing as the party. Okay, so this is post-Polokwane now, and we then move into the 2009 elections, and the party, certainly at a national level, does much better. Not necessarily in numbers of those on the national list, but in the way in which we got deployed. I think Comrade Blade has often made this point, that when people say, oh, it was only after post-Polokwane that a whole lot of you became ministers and deputy ministers. We've not done the arithmetic because we're not in the business of red head counting, like criminologists used to be. So we're not in that business. But when we think about it, I mean, there was possibly more Communist Party members in Mbeki's administrations, possibly, certainly not much less. But we often had the impression that where they were deployed was a poison chalice. So they were put into places where they were expected to drive privatization. They were put into places where they were expected to drive the downsizing of the public sector. That was the fate of our former deputy chairperson, Comrade Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, for instance. Okay. So after 2009, after Polokwane, party comrades got placed, if we're talking about senior cabinet positions, into key critical positions. Trade and industry, for instance, higher education, for instance, and many others. And so there was a better match between what we were trying to achieve, not narrowly, rather have a good ANC comrade than a bad SACP comrade. That's always been our position. We're not trying to just push SACP comrades because they've got a party card. But generally, we think that there was a significant improvement, and therefore, what we'd hoped for in driving for a reconfiguration of the way in which the alliance was functioning, including around, not the most important issue, but including around deployments, was showing signs of significant improvement. And then there was the establishment of this critical leadership structure called the Alliance Political Council. Okay. Now, in reviewing all of what we achieved, well, whatever the illusions and mistakes that we made in the run-up to Polokwane and Polokwane, we want to argue, as we did in the political report as well, that there were significant advances on the strategic agenda that the party was trying to set. We weren't just taken for a ride, full stop. We might have been betrayed, as Comrade Blade said, as later on, we certainly were in some cases. But it wasn't all futile. But we must never forget to make the point that I made at the outset, is that we're not playing solo, comrades. We're engaged in a struggle, including a struggle inside of our own organization, but particularly a struggle within the broader alliance, within the state, and across society. So advances, there are always going to be pushbacks. There are people who don't like the agenda that we're driving for good class reasons that the party is trying to. So we mustn't categorize everything as a failure if we don't achieve everything that we want to achieve. The key thing is, are we creating momentum forward, or are we just being rolled backwards? Okay, let's move on. Now, so we're now at the 13th SACP Congress in 2012. And essentially here we were reaffirming, okay, still, so we're still in the first administration of President Zuma. We're saying that the 12th National Congress resolution on contesting elections under conditions of a reconfigured alliance must be implemented on the basis of a clear framework, principles and guidelines, and that such should be tabled at the Alliance Political Council for implementation, commencing with the next local government elections, and we were obviously then referring to 2016, last year's local government elections. And then we said, therefore, important that in line with the Alliance Summit resolutions, the Alliance Political Council decisively and speedily must intervene in provinces and regions where alliance relations have deteriorated and degenerated to unfortunate levels. So what is that saying? So we're now in 2012, and those of us serving at a national level generally have a sense that we've made reasonable progress. It's not a clean slate, we don't win everything, but there's significant momentum across a number of fronts, including in the state and so forth. But that is not the picture everywhere in South Africa, and that's what our delegates are telling us, amongst other things, at the 13th National Congress in 2012. Yes, you guys are sitting pretty in Cape Town or in the Union buildings, but here in Mpumalanga, because that was one of the places that was strongly mentioned, we are getting massacred, sometimes figuratively and sometimes literally. Radio man in Changazi gets assassinated sometime in this period, and so forth. So you're talking about a reconfigured alliance, alliance political council, and so on, but you're not aware of what is happening on the ground in many locations, not just in Mpumalanga, but also in other hotspots. Okay. So the resolution that we took at the 13th Congress is that the Alliance Summit must actually go down to these places collectively as an alliance to address these problems. Okay, let's move along. The resolution continued at the 13th Congress. As part of organizational renewal and redesign, a standing central commission on state power and electoral options be established to evaluate and further refine our long-term strategy for socialism. So we're not talking about an immediate electoral program, for instance, but what we're saying at our 13th Congress is that in all of these struggles and battles that we're facing, the party mustn't forget that we support the national democratic struggle, but our agenda is socialism, and we see the national democratic struggle as the most direct route to socialism in South Africa. But let's not forget it, and let's begin to develop long-range or strategic plans and perspectives about the prospects for socialism and the role of the party in that respect. An independent program of the party for socialism, as articulated in our South African Road to Socialism, to weigh up what are the favorable objective and subjective conditions, and perhaps the unfavorable conditions, subjective and objective, for advancing more effectively towards socialism, and so on. Okay. And a proper and scientific assessment of the class balance of forces at all levels. And we called for a report of this commission to be tabled in the forthcoming 14th National Congress. And I think that the outgoing, or outgone now, Central Committee, of which I was a part, must indicate that we have not fulfilled point 4 in its totality. We've not actually tabled a proper report in regard to these matters. We must concede that, comrades. However, that's not to say that all of these issues are not to be found in the extensive documentation that you have to, but that's not a good enough excuse. We should have fulfilled the requirement of point 4 of the 13th Congress. Okay. Now that was all then. We're now, okay? And the challenge that the National Secretary of the YCL, and many others, are putting to us is, okay, we've been talking about a reconfigured alliance, but what are the prospects for a reconfigured alliance? Whether we talk about elections or many other things, popular campaigns, many other challenges that we have as an alliance. So the first point we're making, but comrades may disagree, is that the alliance is reconfiguring, but largely by decomposition. Okay. That's the sad reality. And the prime reason for this is that there's an ANC leadership paralysis. It's not the only reason, but it's the key reason. Okay. And it's not just at a leadership level that there's paralysis, much like there was in 2007. If you've got a leadership of a top 6 in an ANC and they're divided down the middle, and I'm not trying to divide them down the middle, but they are, okay, then you have paralysis. The ANC is unable to play the role that, as the Communist Party, we've been calling upon it since 1929 to play, is to play a leading role. We've got a vanguard role. The ANC, we need to have to build an ANC to play that role. At the moment, it's unable to do that. I mean, the most dramatic symptom of this weakness of the ANC currently is that the ANC is unable to convene an alliance political council. That was perhaps one of the most critical mechanisms that we developed out of the Polokwane process, okay, an alliance political council. The ANC keeps setting dates for an alliance political council and then running away from those dates. Okay, this is a problem. It's a serious problem. When we need this alliance political council more than ever, given the levels of unemployment, poverty, inequality, violence, state capture, all of these issues, we need to unify the alliance to address these issues, to mobilize our forces in a relatively unified way around these issues. The ANC can't do it. Okay. Now, why? Well, you know, 3 out of the 4 components of the alliance, led by the party, by the way, have called for President Zuma to step down. Okay, 3 out of the 4. The 4th, obviously, is the ANC, which has not made that call, although many in the ANC have made the call too, including the Integrity Committee of the ANC. So parts of the ANC leadership don't want to come into a forum in which 3 out of the 4 components are saying politely, in the interests of the country, in your own interest, President Zuma, please step down. Comrade Zuma has said that only the ANC can advise him on that step. And so we've been saying, ANC, advise. Please advise. Okay. But we know that there's challenges, and we're not pointing fingers at many comrades, many good comrades in the ANC. It's very hard to strategically move inside an organization which is paralyzed at the top. Okay. So the question that we raise here is, if we're talking about SACP leadership, not going so far out that we leave everybody behind, shouldn't we consider, and shouldn't we as this Congress mandate, the SACP and incoming Central Committee and PB, working with COSATU and SANCO to convene an alliance political council, to play our leadership role in this process, of course inviting the ANC to the meeting. If the ANC makes the choice that the MKVA made to our Congress, that would be very sad, because we don't want an absentee ANC. But we can't just wait for the so-called mother body to be the mother when it's, you know, delinquent, basically, or parts of it are delinquent. Okay. So, you know, when we talk about the leadership of the party and its independent role, its vanguard role, it's not just about elections. It's about a whole range of issues where the party needs to rise to the occasion. Not on its own, working closely with COSATU, working closely with SANCO, and working closely with the maximum number of ANC comrades that we can find. The ANC does not belong to a faction. We mustn't run away from the ANC because a faction has captured key parts of the ANC. Now, if we are talking about what are the prospects for a reconfigured alliance, obviously an important element which the party can't be blind about is the December National Conference of the ANC, elective conference of the ANC. Now, we mustn't fall into Polokwane traps, okay? The party, by the way, contrary to what everyone says, never supported a specific candidate for president at Polokwane. We never did that. We issued a pamphlet on the eve of Polokwane to say, either there must be a change of heart and direction, or there must be a change of leadership. I suppose it was fairly clear what we were referring to, But we meticulously avoided saying we support. We understand why COSATU has come up with not a blank check, but a particular candidate. The party will not, well, unless the incoming CC and PB and incoming leadership. But historically, the party has never supported a candidate in another formation. Okay. We might have, through our body language, through our organizational machinery, done these things. Okay. And we might have had some illusions in the process of doing this. But it's very important that, because we don't want the ANC to tell us who the top 6 in the SACP should be, for instance. We would resent that. And likewise, but as ANC members, which we should all be, we will actively participate in those processes, ANC members, but not as an ANC caucus. Okay. So what is going to happen in December 2017? The party has even been asking the question, is December 2017 going to happen? Okay. There are forces in high positions in the ANC, we saw it at the National Policy Conference as well, who are prepared to collapse provincial conferences, regional conferences, national policy conference commissions and so on, who are prepared if they don't get their way. Okay. And remember, some of them might be facing 783 criminal charges, plus I don't know how many thousands others, okay, since the last count was done. So we need to understand the dangers that we're facing as an alliance, as the ANC as well. Let us ensure, as the party, that we help the ANC to get in good order to its national conference. Very important. It's going to be a very important moment for the party, for the ANC, for the country. Okay, because it's the country that is getting pulled down. Our democracy is under threat, our constitution is under threat by the reckless activity we're seeing. Okay. But as a party, when we approach a reconfigured alliance, when we think about electoral options and so on, we don't know what's going to happen, or even if it is going to happen. Let's fervently hope, and I think it will happen, electoral conference, but we can't be sure. So we can't bank on a certain outcome. Okay. And nor must we simply put all our money into one slate or one hope and so on. But we need to understand that December 2017 is a very critical moment in the thing. But of course, as we try to reconfigure an alliance, as we must, we need to understand that there are also other challenges. What has weakened the alliance also has been the fact that COSATU has been going through a very, very difficult period, partly as a result of mass retrenchments, particularly in its industrial unions, but also business unionism has crept into COSATU, their factions and so on. And then the very, sad breakaway of NUMSA and FAWU. Whatever our views of the individuals involved and the personalities and so on, that has unquestionably weakened COSATU and therefore the organized worker movement. Okay. And therefore it's weakened the alliance. Also, a point that Comrade Blade was trying to make in the political report, and there were some murmurs of disagreement, and we must have this open debate. Is the party has got over 7,000 branches, but what are our branches doing? So many of our branches, we believe, are doing good work on the ground, working with communities. The organizational report would have reflected some of that. But let's also admit that our dynamism in terms of our Red October campaigns, to use that example, has died away. Okay. We were very active in the early 2000s around the financial sector campaign and other Red October campaigns. But now, in many places, what our Red October campaign amounts to is an opening mass meeting, and then a month later, a closing mass meeting in another place. Okay. And we talk about the financial sector and so on. But are we really campaigning around the issues and so on? So we need to also look self-critically. And how do we, because this is part of reconfiguring the alliance. If the party is not active on the ground and so on, if we're not mobilizing popular and working class power effectively, and we're all focused on lists and so on, and we fall into the ANC disease, not to be unfair to ANC because there are many good ANC comrades, but if we fall into that disease where branches are just preoccupied, one with tenders, but then also lists, audits of memberships and all of those things, then we will also be failing ourselves and our alliance. Then we also need, in this new circumstance, to ask questions about who else is mobilizing. Because we have a newish reality, which is the EFF. I was about to call them economic freedom fighters, but let's call them EFF. Okay. EFF, which has shown an ability, demagogically, of course, by and large, to mobilize quite significantly. We shouldn't underrate that. And also what is interesting and challenging is that the DA is also showing a capacity to mobilize in the streets, to mobilize communities. And it's not whites just, in fact, it's overwhelmingly not just whites that are being mobilized by the DA. So we are not. And then, of course, there was the student struggles and so forth, which Comrade Blade can tell us about, and ongoing, and in fact a rise again of local township so-called service delivery protests. Okay. Where are we as an alliance in all of this space? Have we created space for others to operate in this? Okay. Okay. So, I've asked all of those questions and put all those things in place to say, because I know that comrades want to get back to the electoral issue, correctly so, because that's an important question. What is the implication of all of these realities have for the SACP and our positioning, our electoral stance? Okay. Now, on a more positive note, with its deep negative side, is that over the last year, and perhaps even last 8 or 9 months, let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, okay. Comrades, we can't in 2017 at this 14th National Congress have a discussion, as we all realize, I'm sure, about SACP elections and state power, and not also have a discussion and connect it to the question of state capture. Okay. Because as Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa said yesterday, you can fight elections and so on, but the cupboard might be bare. I think he was referring to something else. I think what he was saying is if the party and the ANC contest elections separately, you might end up with diminished returns on both quarters. I think that's what he's saying. But the cupboard may well be bare for other reasons, that everything has gone to Dubai or to Saxonwold or wherever. Okay. So, you know, we win elections, or as part of a coalition, we win elections, but what does state power amount to? It's an empty shell. That's the danger. So we can't have one discussion about the party and elections and the state power question, and on the other hand, neglect, as we haven't been neglecting at this Congress and over the last many months, the question of state capture. And the party, comrades, I think it's not wrong to say, the party has been playing an absolute vanguard role within the alliance, and indeed within the state to some extent, although much of that, you know, is disguised by the secrecy of cabinet meetings and so on, in naming this reality, in identifying the key features of Guptarization, in calling for a judicial commission. Long before the public protector called for a judicial commission, correctly, the party had made that call. One particular now First Deputy General Secretary in particular was responsible, correctly so. We were the first from within the alliance to call for President Zuma to step down. And that call is now reverberated across our alliance. Okay. And it was the party that, in the first instance, exposed the role of Bell Pottinger. Okay? This PR UK-based company, which interestingly, it's a PR company which now has a PR problem, okay? Which is very interesting. And we claim quite a lot of responsibility for exposing the role of Bell Pottinger in writing speeches for ANC Youth League leaders, literally writing speeches, okay, from London, okay. It's outrageous. The level of capture of our organizations and so on is just horrific. We've done that, and we've exposed, because we had a particular responsibility, because we're Bell Pottinger, they were trying to deflect us away from Saxonwold and the Guptas, and to advance a pseudo, as we know, radical discourse, borrowing some Marxist terms in a very shallow way, white monopoly capital and so on. And the party had a particular responsibility, and if comrades were at the National Policy Conference of the ANC, you will see how the party's positioning on this matter caught fire and was repeated and taken up by a majority of ANC delegates, not just on the monopoly capital issue, but on many other issues as well. Okay, so we are not waiting for 2019 elections or whatever to play a vanguard role in this very dangerous and critical space. We have been doing that. And as a result, the party has therefore emerged as a pole of attraction for many within the ANC caucus in Parliament, within the broader alliance for stalwarts and veterans. Many comrades don't have, and we are an organization, okay? The stalwarts and veterans are an ad hoc cry of anger and frustration, okay? And therefore, what we offer as a party with our 250,000 members is an organized formation that is able also then to articulate our views, but also the views that have a strong reverberation across the alliance and across the majority of comrades. We believe in the alliance. But also we have broadened our engagements, okay? For instance, at our Mbizo and in numbers of other interactions. At our Mbizo, we had Business Leadership South Africa, all the way through the South African Council of Churches to the BDS and many other progressive left-wing and left-leaning formations, okay? So the party, not alone, but has a critical responsibility to speaking up, not just for the many in the alliance and many in the mass democratic movement, but even for the widest range of South Africans. A bit like what Comrade, sorry, I think I jumped, okay. Remember the critical role that Comrade Chris played in the year before his death. He was very, very active in the struggle for peace. Comrade Chris didn't say the IFP are the enemies. He went to IFP hostels here on the East Rand. Okay. He spoke to business people. He spoke to black sashes and many other things around, yes, we can disagree about socialism and national democratic revolution and so on, but the immediate danger is that the country collapses. And the party's position has received wide reverberation and echo and support from a very wide range of forces who will never vote SACP, never vote ANC, but who understand that our constitution is under threat, our democracy is under threat, and that we need across a broad patriotic front of South Africans to do this. And the party, I believe, has been playing an important role. Now notice how, and I just want to make a few points in this respect, how this disturbs the role that we're playing, the vanguard role we're playing in this space, disturbs the strategic agenda, for instance, of the DA, which was clearly articulated by Zille a year and a half ago. Zille said, our strategic agenda is not obviously a coalition with the EFF. You know, we might have had a marriage of convenience at Polokwane, but the cooperation between the EFF and the DA is absolutely opportunistic, okay, and is designed basically to keep the ANC out of power in metros, amongst other things. But there's no future in that, and intelligent people in the DA, and if you can find intelligent people in the EFF, and you can sometimes, recognize that. That's not a durable relationship. Now, what was Zille and what is the DA still? The DA is probing into what it believes is a distinction between the constitutionalists in the ANC and the radicals. And they mistake the ANC Youth League chairperson as an example of what is radicalism, and then they mistake others as constitutionalists. What are we as the Communist Party in this situation? We are constitutionalists. We are defending our constitution, but we are also radical, because that's the only way of defending the constitution. You can't have the same prevailing levels of inequality, unemployment, and so on, unless there is a radical transformation. And unless you do those things, basically people will become alienated, frustrated, angry, will march to the tune of EFF, a militaristic tune sometimes, and things will be destroyed. Our constitution will be destroyed. Okay. But our radicalism is not pseudo-leftism, you know, borrowed from Bell Pottinger. It's not at all. Okay. And our constitutionalism is not liberal because our constitution is not liberal. Our constitutional is a national democratic constitution based on the values of the Freedom Charter. Okay. Now, just briefly, that last point that I'm making on that slide, without spending too much time, we're living in a dangerous age, not just here in South Africa. And in fact, there are much more dangerous places than South Africa. At the moment, as we speak, we're seeing a very significant rollback, not everywhere, but a very significant rollback of the left, radical and center-left advances that were scored in Latin America, for instance, in Brazil, in Ecuador, in Argentina, in Venezuela, and so forth. Okay. There's a very significant rollback that is happening. And what is the entry point for the rollback? for the regime change, anti-left regime change agenda. The entry point is corruption. So whether we're talking about Brazil or Venezuela, in difficult circumstances and for, for diverse reasons, to use those two examples, the incumbent left, or formerly incumbent in the case of Brazil, left government and left presidency under Lula and then under Rousseff, that the party, the Workers' Party and so on, got embroiled in corruption. Okay. Not on the runaway scale, perhaps, that we sometimes see in South Africa. And that's when the right wing came in heavy and hard, using the judiciary, using all manner of things, and also heavily supported by a reactionary media and by imperialism to drive an agenda. Now, here in South Africa, because the party from inside of the alliance has not abandoned the site of struggle against corruption to the right wing, okay, we have disrupted a regime change agenda. There's not an easy entry point for imperialism into the space. And I think we need to understand the very important role that we are playing in this respect. Okay. Right. Let me move along. So, I said I was going to talk about elections, and let me get to that. Okay. So, where are we now in 2017? And I've tried as faithfully as possible, perhaps in a bit of a formulaic way, to present like two options, okay, that we are hearing from the Congress. Okay. So, some comrades, and for instance, the position was articulated, and I keep coming back to Comrade Mlu from the National Secretary of the YCL, because I think he gave a coherent argument around what one position might be. Basically, if I understand correctly, what many YCL comrades are saying, and others from other provinces are saying, is the SACP must now seize the moment electorally. Okay. The ANC is in trouble. The party has got a profile like it hasn't had before. We've got a size and so forth, large numbers. We must seize the moment. This idea of a reconfigured alliance is a dream. The Comrade Lou said colourfully that the ANC has just become a mediation committee between factions of the bourgeoisie. Okay, we can debate that. There's some truth in that, there's no doubt about it. Whether it's the full truth is a matter that we need to debate. Okay. But essentially, what does that amount to saying? It's in effect saying, regardless of what happens, for instance, in December, it would just be one faction versus another faction of the bourgeoisie. Okay. And so what has been called for is a new front for socialism. And I listened very carefully and took notes, because there's not consistency, but that's not a big problem. Sometimes it's called a new front for socialism, sometimes it's called a left front, sometimes it's called a unity of the left, or unity of the left and all progressive forces. Okay. So, okay, we can obviously debate, and we do need to debate what are more specifically the details of the platform and program of this proposed front. But essentially, and what is important, is that the platform is not departing, at least in the way it was articulated from the YCL's message of support, it's not departing from our national democratic revolutionary strategy. It's locating the platform within that strategy. Would seek to get support, electoral support, from a wider range of progressive, left-leaning and other forces. I hope I've done general justice to the position that the comrades have argued. Okay. Now, what is a potential counter-argument? And I'm not trying to argue for the sake of arguing, but just so that we think about and have a rational debate about these matters. Okay. So a counter-argument is, okay, we hear some of that, but is the moment right to take a firm decision on our electoral approach now? Okay. That we must play a vanguard role, that we mustn't drop the ball, that we mustn't be flat-footed in this current situation. Absolutely right. And on the state capture issue, if you listen to the Deputy President was basically articulating what the SACP has been saying for several months, actually. Okay. We welcome that, of course. so we must continue to play a vanguard role, but on the election front, do we want to box ourselves into a decision here in July of 2017, all the way forward to 2019? What is going to happen in 2017? What happens if, and I'm risking being factionalist here, but you'll know what I mean. What happens if the Premier League slate wins through hook or crook, okay, in December? What happens? Is there perhaps a massive split in the ANC? I mean, certainly it's going to be very hard for the majority of us to remain in ANC positions and so on under, you know, a gangster leadership. But I think that the same would be felt by many, many ANC comrades. So heavens forbid that that happens, but it's uncertain. It's uncertain. So if there's a major outflowing from that factionally captured ANC, and it's an ANC that is already partially captured faction, but there's a strong fight back which went on in the NPC and elsewhere. If that happens, that eventuality, what is the responsibility of the party to those many comrades? Okay. Sorry, I've jumped a slide. What is the responsibility of the party to many, many good patriotic, what Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa described as radical Democrats? They're not socialists necessarily, but what happens to them? Okay. Are they going to be prepared? Do they want to vote? They will want a new National Democratic Front, a new patriotic front. They may well accept one that has a strong socialist thing, but will they necessarily vote behind and tick the box or cross the box next to the SACP's Black Star and Hammer and Sickle? So maybe it would be great if they did, but are we sure what would happen? Okay. There's the challenge as to, which is an important challenge, is how do we don't drop the ball on socialism, but at the same time remain true to our national democratic broad strategy, which the slogans of our Congress replicate. What happens if the party organizes elections under its own banner, narrowly, and under its own logo? What is the impact of on COSATU? Now, comrades would have listened carefully, as I was, to what Comrade Becky and Charlie's message was to our Congress. What he said was, amongst other things, COSATU has taken resolutions, and we think we've done very well, in swelling the ranks of the SACP and the ranks of the ANC. Okay. We've seen that as a very important task. So what Comrade Becky and Charlie as the General Secretary of, of COSATU is saying to us is that there is a strong, with all of the frustrations and disappointments in the ANC, there is strong COSATU working class support for the ANC, for a different ANC, but for the ANC. Perhaps the ANC of the old, for the ANC of promise, or maybe even for the existing ANC. So if we then mobilize against an ANC ticket, or not necessarily against, but separately from an ANC ticket, do we unite the working class beginning with COSATU, or do we divide it? Now we must answer that not flat-footed, not timidly. We must have the courage of our convictions and so on, but we must also rationally and carefully answer that question, for instance. And the same would apply to the wider working class. Let's never forget that in South Africa, the working class is very religious in South Africa, okay? And now, of course, the party is not anti-religion. We are not anti-religion. But that's the perception amongst many, 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 many South Africans. They love the party. What we're doing, the views that we're articulating, the fact that we're going for the Guptas, they love that. But they worry that the party doesn't go to church. And in fact, some of our party comrades do go to church, and some of them in the outgoing CC are even ministers in churches, okay? So we're not. But we mustn't underestimate the popular reading. Even from senior comrades inside of the parliamentary caucus, I get lots of jokes about how I don't go to church on Sundays, and the assumption is that I'm anti-religion. Okay, so so I'm not saying the party must now become opportunistically religious, like some people who visit strange churches and become consecrated ministers opportunistically, okay, on particular. Obviously, we're not to do that. But these are also calculations we need to make as we think about the modality and approach and how we approach the working class and popular forces as a Communist Party within the context of elections. Okay. Answer it soberly, not with, not with timidity. We mustn't be scared of being a communist party, but at the same time, let's think thoughtfully, carefully about all of that. Okay. Now, of course, all of what I've just said has responses. Fair enough. Sorry, next slide. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, okay. So the response to the responses could be, here we go, Jeremy Cronin again. We've seen him in 2005, 2007, 2012. Next time round, it's Chris Matlauko. Okay, not Jeremy Cronin. That has this task. Okay. But all of this is metaphysical language, big English, and so on. Okay, I'm not saying comments are saying that, but you know what I mean. It's all a way of just delaying. You're saying, let's maybe wait until after December. But this is just, we've had these delaying tactics before. Okay, I think that's a deep sentiment, and perhaps an understandable sentiment amongst many comrades. So we need to understand that, not necessarily talk past each other or divide the party on this issue, but there must be sensitivity to this. And in particular, comrades, and that's what comrades have directly said, is you're falling back into a Polokwane illusion, that an ANC conference, in particular, this or that particular personality is the messiah that will come and rescue things and so on. So we absolutely mustn't fall into those illusions. Okay. So the response to the response of the responses is in the next column. Okay. And one could go round and round in circles like this. Okay. But I think a response would be, yes, we must be bold in the situation. I've already made that response. But let's think twice about boxing ourselves into a fixed decision for 2019 now in July of 2019. But in doing that, we mustn't put all our investments into hopes for a December outcome and so forth. And then the last point we want to make on this slide is, but let us talk actively and proactively into, amongst other things, the December conference. Let us say that the party, which we are strongly considering the prospect and the necessity, which might not be a welcome necessity, but it might be a necessity forced on us to contest elections independently as part of a left front. And what we're doing is we're watching. Unless there's an immediate establishment of a judicial commission and early prosecutions of the worst offenders, exposed by emails and many other things, unless there's that, unless there's a cleanup now in the coming months of what's going on in SOEs and critical ones like ESCOM and Transnet and PRASA and SABC and so on, unless there's that, let's also call for a job summit now in the coming 6 months, so that we're not so preoccupied with palace politics and who's on lists and what's going to happen in December at the ANC conference that we forget to talk to the masses of South Africa and the working class in particular. So those would be some things. It's not just let's wait passively for after December. Let's talk into and seek to influence the outcomes, not around personalities, but around programmatic perspectives and platforms and commitments. As Comrade Becky and Charlie said, no blank checks to anybody or to any slate whatsoever. Okay, next slide. Now, comrades, when you're a navigator or a pilot in a plane, it's important to be able to take off, obviously. But it's also very important to have a sense of whether there's an airport at the other end once you've taken off. Okay? And what is the condition of that airport? So that's another complicated question that we need to ask ourselves around elections, including the idea of the SACP independently contesting elections. We don't know, and it's very difficult to determine what will happen. Part of the problem is that you can conduct surveys of South Africans and so on to detect what support there may or may not be for an SACP electoral list. But until you actually, or unless you are actually campaigning and have made that decision, you're not going to get an accurate position. So we need to concede that. In the early 2000s, at the height of the very strong relationship, the left-axis relationship between COSATU and the SACP, okay, when we were campaigning against the 1996 class project, and when the party was hugely valued in COSATU ranks. I think, yeah, okay, I'll come to that. We were fighting against privatization, we're fighting against many other things. COSATU funded a shop stewards survey. I think Comrade Blade, it was in 2002, somewhere around there. Okay. And what they found was that there was huge support amongst COSATU shop stewards for the ideological role the party was playing, for the campaigning role the party was playing in supporting COSATU on anti-privatization and many, many other issues, labor brokers, all of those issues. Hugely appreciated. But when the shop stewards were asked, but would you then vote for an SACP ticket, only 6% of them responded yes. Okay. So presumably the majority of them still favored the ANC. Now, things have changed. We're not saying that that result would be the same that would happen in 2019 if the party campaigned independently. It gives us some indication, but not necessarily an accurate one. Things have changed sometimes for the worse. Okay, so there's a significant weakening of COSATU in particular. COSATU, let's assume that COSATU came into a campaign, which is uncertain. We might split the COSATU in the process into an SACP left-axis campaign for elections. Do they have the same muscle? Do they have the same resources? COSATU is in trouble that they had earlier on. Will, as I said earlier, what we're seeing is the NC significantly losing support electorally. Okay, and unless things are dramatically turned around, that electoral support will continue to decline. But will that electoral support come to the SACP or to some alternative ticket? Has the EFF, for instance, stolen a march on us and got in ahead of us in mobilizing much of a potential constituency? Okay. And also we need to reflect on the failed, basically, NUMSA SAFTU attempts to launch last year, obviously it was early days for them, some kind of Workers' Party United Front initiative. I'm coming to an end here.